write them down. You can raise your hands, and one of the ushers will come by and they'll just stick out a little bag. It's the offering bag. They're not asking for money, I promise. They're asking for the question. And you can put the question in the bag, and they will try to get it up to me as soon as they can, okay? So we'll do our best. So what I'd like to do now is just start off our time with the questions that I have at hand. And we're going to do, some of them are addressed to specific panel members, but any panel member can jump in at any point if you have 2 cents that you want to add to onto the back of whatever the person said before you. So this first one is directed to Skylar. Skylar, any advice on supporting someone who's in denial about their mental illness?
I think just letting them be as they are, unless you're fearing for their safety or another. When someone is experiencing mental illness, especially that's in a psychosis, so it's more severe than, let's say, mild to moderate depression, what they see and hear, they really truly believe. So who is anyone to tell them that it's not real, right? You're only going to drive the relationship farther away by telling them that it's not real. So I think just listening to what they're telling you and really letting them talk without giving advice, because I don't think advice can be given unless you're a professional or have experienced it yourself. There's also a phone number called CAR 87. If you Google it, it's a mental health professional, nurse, and a police officer that will arrive at your house, and they're coming with the understanding that it's a mental health emergency. Also, there's a number called 811. It's the BC Nurses Line, and you can call and describe any symptoms that you or the person you know is experiencing and get some advice from a professional on what to do. But really just be willing to listen to them without having to try and solve it for them, because they need to do that on their own.
I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that, or you don't have to. Sure, go ahead.
So just a thought is that, to reinforce the comment Sarah, is that it's often characteristic of some forms of mental illness where the patient doesn't have any insight that they actually have the disease. And so that's the thing, the aspect to keep in mind is that, particularly with, say, schizophrenia, they actually are hearing voices and they actually have problems developing. And this often leads to lack of continuing to treat their medications. So it's very important to talk to them, but also be aware of who reading the phone, because you can't, sometimes the patient doesn't actually realize what's going on, just to reinforce this idea as a symptom often of schizophrenia.
And also, the interesting thing about change research, about when is a client or when is somebody willing to change, there's a diagram and a cycle that has been researched. And so there is a pre-contemplative stage of change. So what that means is before they actually realize that they want to change or they're willing to change, there's a pre-stage. And in that pre-stage, how can we support them to get to the contemplative stage of change? That's vital. So the research is showing that what you do in the pre-contemplative stage is to build trust, is to ensure safety, safety, safety. So that the client, the person that you're trying to help feels safe, feels safe, feels safe. And when they feel safe during the pre-contemplative stage, when there's something you want to share with them or kind of gently suggest, then it's a lot easier for them to move on to the stage of change.
Thank you. I have another question here, and this is written by, and I said that this is written by a person who is a current sufferer of OCD and depression. I'm going to direct this one to Dr. McVicker. That are depression, are they curable? Depression and OCD, is there a cure, or is it a long-term, more of a long-term disability that someone's going to have to deal with? I think they're just trying to find out if there's an actual cure available.
So It's a difficult answer. I'm not a clinician, and I think every patient's experience may be different, and maybe transit or maybe triggered by what are considered more biological causes. So some conditions can be altered. But often depression, it strikes, and I think the treatments right now are available to give tools for the patient to help get over the worst symptoms and then deal with their condition on their own. So it's not just, there's no cure, but there are treatments to alleviate symptoms. And then with that, the symptoms start to diminish, then the person can learn how to adapt to the condition and to live as a healthy life, even though they have a condition.
Okay. And this question is directed to Grace. They're asking Grace, what practical suggestions or advice would you offer to spouses and children of someone who's suffering from depression? They mentioned depression, anxiety, and mental illness. So that's pretty wide. But for support and to spouses and children who have a loved one.
I think we've talked about it a couple of times. The self-care piece is really important. So the spouse of somebody who's supporting a family member with depression or anxiety really does need to take care of themselves. And I think Matt gave a lot of really good suggestions when he was like enjoying a good movie, knowing when to just slow down and you need time for yourself. So that piece, the self-care, is really important because it's a long journey. The journey is going to be long, and so you need to take care of yourself. Being resourced and getting connected with the people in the community. There are a lot of support and free support resources in the city of Vancouver. So if Vancouver Coastal Health, I think I brought some pamphlets in the back as well. Here to help .ca is also a link. It actually has, it's actually a really good website. So if you go on that website, the link is here to help BC.ca. If you go on it, you can actually find some assessments. So depression assessments. So are you actually depressed yourself? And then there's an anxiety one. So are you going through, do you have an anxiety disorder? So you can go through that as a first checklist, go through those, I guess, symptoms and see if you're experiencing it. There's also a assessment for caregivers. So as a caregiver of somebody who is depressed or dealing with a mental health issue, are you actually feeling some of those symptoms as well? So that's a really good site to go to. And then with that, you actually go to your family doctor. You can print it out, your results. You can go to your family doctor and you can start the journey there. So have conversations with the family doctor and they can direct you to different programs in the city.
Thank you. Anybody want to add anything to that? Okay. And this, here's a question. What are, let me see, I'm trying to read handwriting, which if I had written half of these, I wouldn't be able to understand, believe me. Here's one. What's happening with Alzheimer's? I mean, this is probably back to Dr. McVicker, but what's happening in Alzheimer's, and how can we help for a situation where the brain cells are dying? Both the patient, the caregiver. What information can you give to help this person?
This morning, as I woke up, I usually check the New York Times online, and there's a very good article actually from a woman who first presented with Alzheimer's and her life and her husband in the situation. It has a really great description of the impact and what's possible to do. And so you have to keep in mind, at this point in time, there is no magic drug. There is no magic treatment to stop this. But there are some drugs that maybe help reduce the rate of decline for a temporary period of time in some patients. That's promising. But all the therapies being attempted in the last 20 years with billions of dollars being invested haven't actually come up with a clear-cut solution. But this article talks about her experiences, and I think that there's a lot of good messages there in terms of the environment, the family, and how to interact with people and friends when you say maybe you're first diagnosed with the first signs of losing your memory and losing weight. And so I think there are programs you can go into. It's not possible to stop it by Sudoku or learning the language, but you can certainly make the time better, and you can maybe relieve the stress and deal with that. So, the progressive nature of these diseases is quite tough to see, and I hope research will lead to more insights and more interventions yet. But right now, it's more a societal response to people like that. The environment, the family can really make it a lot better.
This question I'm going to push towards this end of the table here a little bit. But the question is this: how do you know when you've, this is in quotes, crossed the line from having low, what maybe you would describe as low self-esteem and being worried, to being clinically depressed and needing medical intervention? And maybe, I don't know if either of you would want to crack at that, or we can move the microphone over. Sure.
My experience with this was, I think naming is really good. It's good to have indicators. There's an indicator. Fiona was, I think Fiona mentioned something too. Grace was mentioning also indicators. And I think they're readily available online. The one I found was at UBC bookstore. There's, in the medical section, there's an indicator. And you can just ask those questions to yourself every week. And it's basically a continuum per spectrum or whatever, where you're at. Most of the low mood questions that I saw were based on things that you normally like to do. How much do you like them lately, like this week, each week? It's things that you normally really enjoy. And those are a lot of the indicators I read. So that was helpful for me to pinpoint depression and to say that this is, extended periods of low mood. And that's also, I went and done a psychiatric assessment. It might be a little scary for some to think about doing that, but it was very helpful to go even further into exploring the spectrum of low mood and other things where I had other risk factors. So it took 3 hours to do. It took 2 1.5-hour meetings with a psychiatrist, and it's free. The government pays for all these things. So we live in BC. We have the blessing of this government that gives us this care card, and we're allowed to go and see a psychiatrist and get an assessment. So I really encourage anyone, if you feel like the indicators of depression, you're like borderline or low or high, you're sort of wondering, go ahead and get an assessment and don't be afraid of it. At first I wanted to get a Christian psychiatrist because I just thought maybe I could talk to him about something, but you don't really talk to the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist is there to measure very analytical measurements. So it's not a counselor, right? So a counselor is different. The psychiatrist is there to just measure your progress and measure where you're at, and just communicate on a very scientific sort of objective level. The psychologists, the counselors, and the psychotherapists, therapy people are there to give more of that moral support and encouragement, and also to put new ideas in your head, like not in a weird way, but in a way that sort of can help you feedback what you just said. If you say, well, I've always wanted to try this thing, but I'm afraid to, the counselor might repeat that and say, oh, you're afraid to try that. Why don't you go ahead and try that? Or why wouldn't you? Or they're helpful for those kind of things. Questions that your friends might not be quick enough to ask you, or might not be focused enough in the time. They're just providing moral support. They might not be ready or equipped to ask you the right question, whereas the counselor is being paid to pay close attention to what you're saying and feedback the right thing so you can progress. Yeah.
Sure. I'll just say a little bit about my personal experience with depression. I think you kind of get your mind clouded to thoughts of harming yourself are a normal part of life. It isn't at all. So if you ever have a thought of harming yourself or another, don't justify it to mean stress or just part of life, part of growing up. It's not a normal part, and I think that really needs to be stressed that there's something wrong and you're gonna have to talk to someone. And the black and white difference that I can see from being without help and in a deep depression to today where I still have depression, but I'm living through it and I'm making a daily, hourly sometimes choice to be happy and focus on positive things. It doesn't mean that life is still not crappy and sometimes has its ups and downs and still things come your way that aren't great. You still get angry and sad and mad. Not lessening any of those emotions and really recognizing, like you're saying, about what's different about the way I feel from when I can remember to be happy, or you lost or gained a lot of weight, you lost or have more sleep. A loss or a gain of your regular behavior. Not the norm for everyone, because there is no norm, but your norm. And how is it different from how it used to be, I think is a way to notice if something's wrong.
That's really good. And now, this is a mental health in the church conference, so I actually have a spiritual question or two that are tied to this subject, and so whoever's brave enough to go ahead and jump in. I'm the pastor, so I could probably jump in on one or two of these, but how do we distinguish between anxiety as a disorder and anxiety as a lack of faith in the power and goodness of God? When is the issue of anxiety one of illness, and when is it a matter of repentance and renewed faith in God's promises in Christ? In other words, what is the interrelationship between anxiety that is probably needs to be treated medically or clinically, and a person's faith, and how that comes to bear on all of that? Anyone can take a crack at it if they like.
So it's good to think of in life you get anxious and you get sad, and this is the reality of life. This is life experience. It doesn't always go well. I think the idea of depression is more than anxiety. It's more when it interferes with normal life. It reaches a stage where you can't actually adapt, and you maybe get anxious at everything, or you get sad all the time, and sad without cause. Another aspect of the definition, perhaps, with depression, people feel sad, but they still have a certain self-worth. Maybe it's getting to a stage of sadness where you also have a loss of self-worth, and self-loathing is part of it. And that's maybe a bad sign that's progressed to a point where you need help. Anxiety, everybody has anxious moments, doubts, thoughts. But I think this is the idea of anxiety disorders, where it's really interferes with your ability to drive or interact with people on the street, or there's a ill-defined line. Maybe some people can draw a line somewhere right here beyond there. It's a disorder. Up here is normal anxiety dealing with life's issues. I'm not sure if we can carefully draw that line. But maybe it's a good spectrum to think of it. Is your life totally disrupted because you're anxious? Then it's good to get some treatment, talk to people, and be open about it.
Very similar to what Skylar was saying about your normal, what your mean is. With the wife of a pastor, what do you think of that?
Well, I think Brian has mentioned it. The anxiety disorder is when it actually interferes with everyday life. And actually, it doesn't go away. So anxiety and stress are very similar, but usually stress goes away when the situation changes. But with the anxiety disorder, it still is there when the environment has changed. You're still suffering with the anxiety. So an example, I worked with a client who's 9 years old, a 9-year-old boy who's a refugee in the public school in Vancouver here. And he has an anxiety disorder called selective mutism. So what that means is at school, when he's at school, he doesn't talk. He doesn't talk to his friends, he doesn't talk to his teachers, he is actually silent. And even the nonverbals, he doesn't use a lot of actions or nodding, he doesn't respond. But at home, where he actually feels a little bit more safe, he actually does have 1 or 2 words that he expresses with his family. So now the stress of where this anxiety disorder started, we're thinking is because he's a refugee, he came from Syria not too long ago. And the traumatic effects that has affected this little boy has caused him so much anxiety that actually he doesn't feel safe. Even though he's at school in the city of Vancouver with loving and caring teachers and friends, it's still there. And so the anxiety disorder is causing his way of life to be affected. And so that's actually when we have to deal with it. We really need to decide what to do with it.
Well, regarding the issue of faith and anxiety, I'll just speak as a pastor to this one. Remember, Jesus said you needed to have faith as a mustard seed. I think the trap we get into with the issue of faith is we compare what we think is healthy faith to what we think we see healthy faith in other people looking like. And so we diminish ours. We diminish the faith that we have, what God has given us, because we're playing a comparison game. And that just adds to the anxiety if anxiety is your issue. So one of the things that you can do is just stop playing the comparison game. Talk to your pastor, pray with your friends. But there was a man who said to Jesus, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. We're all there on some level. And if your lack of belief is adding anxiety to your life, it's part of why you should be part of a family of Christians who are around you and supporting you and praying for you. So, the next question is interesting, because you were mentioning children. Here it is. What does research show about the connection of kids' use of screens, which is really interesting, whether it's, I don't even know if it's called, people don't even talk about television anymore. Now they're talking about iPhones and iPads and everything else, but connections of kids' use of screens and depression and other mental illnesses. Has there been any research done on this that you're aware of at all, and is there any way you could elaborate on that? Anybody? Sure.
This is actually a very controversial area. Some people claim that the use of video games is transforming our society, and the studies don't really support that. There's a lot of claims, a lot of very subjective claims. One nice thing about research is you have an idea, it's called a hypothesis. You say, start off with the idea, using video games and screens is bad. You start to investigate, what's the measures of that. Well, no one's actually shown that this is bad. Certainly when our son was young, we didn't really want him to play a lot of video games. We wanted to go out there and play sports, read books. Until I saw on TV where they're teaching surgeons who use arthroscopic surgery, where it goes through a very small hole. They're actually very good at video games, and this is transferred ability to use arthroscopic surgery. It's like a two-dimensional screen. So I think it's a simplistic thing just to say, just dismiss the use of screens. I don't think that's really relevant. But just be aware, it's a very controversial area, and the data so far I think is skeptical.
Skeptical. Okay. Well, here's a question that maybe anybody in the panel can take a crack at. What does flourishing with mental illness look like? This idea of flourishing with mental illness. What would that look like? We had that Grace. Fiona had that chart earlier. If you were here earlier, of that kind of continuum going in two different directions, and flourishing was on there. What does flourishing with mental illness look like?
I think I'll answer from the perspective of contemplative listening. Just the practice of the presence of God. And the realization that that is a practice. And that we really need to be able to live in the present and live each moment. It's hard, not just for mental illness. For those of us who don't have mental illness and trying to have good doing mental health. That in itself is difficult, but being present to each moment and listening to what the Spirit is prompting us, and what He's saying, what He's bringing across, I think is a very good thing for the church to hear, and for myself as a disciple to hear, that actually God is bigger than what I actually even think of Him to be. That He's the same in the past, in the present, and in the future. That's comforting, and that really does help. So the practice of contemplative listening, spiritual direction, and actually hearing and listening to God and where He's at, and how, with a mental illness, how do I live, and how do I continue on, and what is God speaking into that? It's difficult. It's a difficult journey.
Please.
So I would think it often hits children between 10 and 20, and this is very tough because it kind of takes them out of the stream of life, where they're set back maybe with their schooling or just the social interactions. So I would say it would be great if it would allow the adaptation to the circumstances of life to fit in.
Does anybody on the side of the table take a crack at this?
That's it. I just wanted to say that the one thing that I really find helpful is to speak to that. It's a little bit to the scripture and to the faith side. Is we are word kind of people, word-based, and like stigma is a word used in the wrong way to kind of curse someone or whatever, stigmatize or say marginalize someone. On the other hand, you can use words to build up people, to bless people. And Jesus gave a lot of instructions about this. Another thing He was very firm on was, a sense of taking His word seriously, what He said about those who are needy, those who, really need help or whatever in the society, is that we should love them, we should include them, we should protect them. There's a scripture that says, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and then all these things will be added to you. And in my experience, there's a twofold. There's the society face that I put up to outside, but then there's my following, spirit of God and focusing on God's side, where I feel like I'm always in a relationship with God and His words and what His commands are, what His basis for my salvation of belief in God, in Jesus. And that, although it doesn't, you can say you can't fix a boat if it's got like a huge leak in it. If it has a small leak, you can patch it, and then the boat will stay afloat. But if there's a huge problem, there's not as much you can do. We can't pray and ask God to fix the boat if it's already sinking. So I think there's little things we can do in the meanwhile, like maintaining your spiritual life is like that. You keeping everything in some kind of maintained order, and those are basic things like following the commandments. But I think there's real dangers to stigmatizing, because what it does is it almost puts a hole in someone's ship and saying, or a boat or whatever, where you're taking a big chunk out, and there's a huge risk for them that maybe could have been avoided. Right?
Okay, well, we have time for one or two more questions, and I chose an interesting one, and anyone can kind of take a crack at this one. But with our new government, of course, this has been around for a while, and then of course there's been the closure of a number of these little businesses around town just this last weekend, or at least the attempted closure. This is regarding the question of marijuana. This is a very BC question, obviously. How does marijuana use as a teenager impact brain development? If anyone can take a crack at that. And also, does marijuana use increase the likelihood of developing a mental health disorder or mental illness? And does anyone have any idea?
So I think society's undergoing a great experiment right now. It's a little scary experiment. This is not an area I do research on, but I've been talking to some people who do treat patients with MS, multiple sclerosis, with marijuana because it helps alleviate pain. And as neurologists, they tell them this will reduce your ability to think. It's called cognitive impairment, so it's reduce your ability to deal with issues and plan events. And they tell them that you will have less pain, but this will be the problem. And when you're older and then you stop taking it, it clears up in about 4 weeks. That's a little while too, right? So think about that. But what's scary is that if the data shows in a study earlier this year, if it's from 15 to 25, if you smoke a lot of marijuana consistently for that time period, that cognitive impairment doesn't go away. It has to do with this timing where you're developing circuits in the brain and the connections being made. So it's a little scary, the age at which this may happen. So there's a thought there. The second thought is not all marijuana is the same, and there's lots of active ingredients in different strains that have different effects on the brain, and there's some very strong, potent strains that will trigger psychotic episodes. And the fear is, once this is triggered, the brain learns. Right? So this changes the brain. Things like this change the brain, and it's like learning the memory of the brain that can have a long-term impact. So there's issues that are being tested on the populations right now that has become more widespread. There's no control of maybe with age it's starting, and the ingredients within the products. This is a booming area. This is like an experiment. That's right. It's like an experiment right now that has quite frightening impact. I'm not totally against it. But I think the knowledge we need more knowledge before we make this broad change.
Well, I think we're about 1:05, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. I have a lot more questions in front of me. I'm so sorry if I didn't get to your questions this afternoon. But our panelists are going to stick around for another 10-15 minutes. So if you really, really do have a pressing question that you don't feel was answered, you can come on up and talk to them. What I'd like to do is just kind of give you a sense of what we're going to be doing here at Grace Vancouver Church next in our journey along the lines of mental health. On the 14th of May, we're going to be showing a film. And I don't know how many of these film series we're going to do, but we're starting with this one. It's called Alive Inside. Maybe I can talk Brian into coming back for this one. He'll probably be out of town. He always is. He's a traveling kind of guy. But this is a film that was it was up for 6 2014 awards. It was a winner of the Sundance Film Festival Audience Award, and it is specifically about dementia and Alzheimer's. It's more of a documentary style film. It's not a drama. And specifically, if you know the work of, and I'd like to say Oliver Sacks. If you know his work at all, he was the fellow that was represented by Robin Williams in the movie Awakenings. Later in his life, he died a few years ago, but later in his life, he had specifically taken his focus into two areas that he loved: brain science and music. He actually wrote a book called Musophilia, which is a wonderful book if you haven't read it. And what they did is they researched bringing iPods into retirement homes where there were people who were stricken with Alzheimer's and dementia, and allowing them to listen to music and seeing what the results were. And the results were astounding. And I don't want to give any more of the film away from that. You just have to see it for yourself. But we're going to be showing that here on May 14th at 7 p.m. It'll be on our church website as well. Invite your friends. It'll be free. So please do come to that. Lastly, all I'd like to do is just thank our panelists. So thank you very much, all of you. And thank you to the volunteers who helped make this all possible today. And thank you for coming, all of you. So God bless you and take care. Have a safe ride home.